In this video, we will follow the road to the revolution, the events which led us to break our ties with our mother country. We will discuss the main reasons for why we declared our independence and go through them in a timeline order. The revolution started because of many things, but you can trace most of them back to this event, the French and Indian War.
The French and Indian War started like many wars do, an argument over land. Britain wanted the Ohio River Valley, but the problem was it belonged to France. Both sides believed they had right to the land. Neither of them actually did, but no one cared about the Native Americans. Tensions had been high for years, but it all came to a head when 22-year-old George Washington and his men attacked the encampment of French ensign Joseph Coulon de Jumonville. No one knows who fired the first shot, but the fight soon escalated. The French accused Washington of firing unprovoked during peacetime. The French took it as an act of war, and thus the French and Indian War began. In America, it was called the French and Indian War, but the conflict also spanned 5 continents. On those continents, it was known as the 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War started in 1756, when England declared war on France. This war was thought to be the First World War. While the British, French, and Spanish fought in the colonies, Frederick the Great of Prussia and Europe battled off against troops from Austria, France, Russia, and Sweden. The French and Indian War ended in 1763 and consisted of 11 battles and lasted for 9 years. It ended when the Treaty of Paris was made. The treaty was an agreement signed by the British and French ending the French and Indian War. In this, England got the French territory east of the Mississippi River and additionally the territory of Spanish Florida. They got major territorial gain from winning the war, but in doing so, it cost them a huge amount of resources. England was indebted and needed a way to get resources and money back. They couldn't tax their own people because they were fed up with taxes, but if pushed, could start a rebellion. So wisely, the king decided to tax the colonies.
And so, in April 1764, King George III introduced the Sugar Act. This act put a tax on many items such as sugar, paper, and foreign products like coffee, wine, and textiles. It also cut the cost of sugar in half, making sugar being shipped to England cheaper. As you can imagine, this did not go over well with the colonists. One of the main cash products in the colonies was molasses and rum, both containing sugar. It was repealed in 1766 because of growing protests against taxation. Many other acts were introduced, such as the Stamp Act. It was made by the British government in 1765, March 22. It put a tax on paper products within the colonies. Any of these products had a special stamp on it. This tax annoyed the colonists greatly and sparked talk of revolution among the people. There was also the Quartering Act. The Quartering Act was made in 1765 and allowed British soldiers to stay in people's homes. The people had to feed and house them, and they had no say in the matter. These acts angered the colonists. They didn't understand why a small island, thousands of miles away, should be able to control them and impose taxes. They had no representation in the government, so they had no power to fight against them. These acts began to stir up unrest among the colonists, and thoughts of independence became more appealing.
On December 16, 1773, the Sons of Liberty, dressed as Native Americans, silently boarded 3 ships from London docked in the Boston harbor. These ships held crates of taxed tea. Infuriated with the taxes, the men overpowered the ship's crew and threw 342 chests of tea into the harbor. This sent quite the message to the British government that the colonists would rather destroy the goods than put up with the tax. The British government would not yield so easily. They would retaliate. This protest was one of the many that would lead to war. 1774. Responding to the Boston Tea Party. The British Parliament enacted the Intolerable Acts, also known as the Coercive Acts, to punish Boston. They closed the Boston harbor, forbade public meetings in Massachusetts, and transferred the trials of British officials accused of capital offenses to England or another colony. This, of course, made it worse. Tensions were extremely high and violent acts against loyalists were getting worse by the day. So they started the First Continental Congress. 1774. First Continental Congress. The First Continental Congress was a meeting in response to the British Parliament's enactment of the Intolerable Acts. 56 delegates from all the colonies except Georgia met at the Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia. They discussed boycotting British goods and the growing aggression towards Britain. Two prominent figures in the Revolution were there, John Adams and George Washington. They also set up a date for the next Continental Congress.
The Boston Massacre, if it can even be called a massacre, started when 9 British soldiers shot several of a crowd of 300 or 400 who were harassing them verbally and throwing various objects. It was a key event in the lead up to the Revolutionary War. The soldiers were put on trial, but they were let go on the grounds of self-defense. They were defended by John Adams, one of the leaders of the revolution at the time. This caused quite the uproar because, in the eyes of the people, he was defending the enemy. He believed everyone had the right to a fair trial, and he showed the British that the colonies would not break the rules of their own mission. They would treat everyone equally and fairly, friend or enemy. Of course, this is not exactly true, but apparently slaves didn't count. Paul Revere was a very important figure leading up to and during the Revolution. One of his first known political acts was to make an engraving of the Boston Massacre. It was extremely over-dramatized and depicted the British soldiers firing into an unarmed crowd with many dead. It is one of the most famous depictions we have of the event. He was also a member of the Sons of Liberty and one of the main leaders during the Boston Tea Party. But what he was most famous for was his midnight ride. On April 18, 1775, Paul Revere was instructed to ride and warn the troops during the Battle of Lexington and Concord. He is seen as one of the heroes of the Revolution. He did a great service to our nation, but there's another who has been hidden in his shadow. 16-year-old Sybil Ludington. She did the same thing as Paul Revere, but she rode twice the distance he did, and unlike him, managed to avoid capture, and her efforts were recognized by George Washington himself. But she did not have the same publicity as Revere. His deed was commemorated in a poem by
The Battle of Lexington and Concord was on April 19, 1775. Nobody knows who fired the first shot, but it was known as the shot that was heard all around the world. The Minutemen were ordered not to shoot, but one of them did, and it started to become a bloody nightmare. It's 1775, during the Revolutionary War. The Green Mountain Boys, led by Ethan Allen and assisted by Benedict Arnold, surprised the British and overtook the fort. The main reason why they took Fort Ticonderoga was because they mainly just wanted their cannons. 40 Americans died and 40 were wounded, but in the end it was known as an American victory. The Battle of Bunker Hill was in June 1775. The British defeated the Americans in the Battle of Bunker Hill. It took place in Charleston, Massachusetts, which is now part of modern-day Boston. Despite their loss, the inexperienced colonial forces inflicted a lot of damage on the British troops, taking many casualties, and the battle provided them with important confidence.
The Olive Branch Petition was on July 5th, 1775. It was a petition that was sent to the king. It was about the colonists' loyalty to the British Crown. It emphasized their right as British citizens, and it was the colonists' last effort to make peace with the British. The king refused to sign the document. He didn't even read it. The colonists could now justify liberating themselves from the British government. They could say that they had tried to reason with the king. Common Sense was a pamphlet made by Thomas Paine in 1776. It challenged the authority of the British government and the royal monarchy. The plain language that Thomas Paine used spoke to the common people of America, so everyone could read it. Paine in the pamphlet said that the British rule was responsible for many problems in the colonial society. It was known as the first work to openly ask for independence from Great Britain.
All of these events in a war finally pushed our founding fathers to write the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence headed the unanimous declaration of the 13 colonies of the United States of America. It is the founding document of the United States. It was made on July 4th, 1776 by the Second Continental Congress. It consists of 3 main points. Men have certain inalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the British monarchy has infringed upon those rights. All men are created equal, so they should be treated as such. Individuals have a civic duty to defend these rights for themselves and others, and therefore have the right to declare independence. The Declaration summarized the colonists' motivations for seeking independence, and by signing it, The country of America changed from a fantasy to a reality.
Now America has officially broken away from our mother country. The reasons for this is we didn't have any representation in the government. We were taxed by Britain. We didn't want to abolish slavery like England, and we wanted to start our own government. We are now independent, but it isn't over yet. We still have to endure many hardships and deaths. We now have to win a war that seems impossible to win. We are going against the biggest superpower in the world. The war has just begun.